how come podcasters, for most of us, are struggling with downloads or in general awareness, exposure for our shows? Because we all love our guests so much, and guess what? There is an insane amount of work that goes into podcasting. If your point is that these are good-looking people with six-packs and you can put them on a landing page, well, guess what? People can also go to Instagram for that. What is really important is that you're serving a different cohort of people so that they can do something they weren't able to do before. Hey guys, this is Fei Wu from Feisworld Media, and in this video I want to address something head on, which is how come podcasters, for most of us, are struggling with downloads or in general awareness, exposure for our shows? Because we all love our guests so much, and guess what? There is an insane amount of work that goes into podcasting. If you're a podcaster watching this video, I don't have to elaborate between organizing an interview, working with a secretary to actually schedule it, not your secretary, but your guests most likely, and have to record it, produce it, pay someone to manage it, and trying to publish to all the social channels. And guess what? It's cricket and nobody is necessarily listening. And for those of you who are looking at downloads alone, by the way, here's some bad news, because just because it shows a download doesn't mean somebody actually clicked the play button. That's when Chartable and similar services will come into play, because they will show you how many plays it actually happened. So in this video, I want to talk about, basically downloads in general, but also discoverability and research you need to do, and the type of curation work you must do as a content creator, in this case podcaster, but it's also true if you're a YouTuber, a blogger, or a writer. How do you expose your content in such an organized and curated way to serve your audience? So let's get right into it. You probably have heard last August 2019, Google announced something quite dramatic, and we're super excited to hear that during podcast movement, which is they started to index content from podcasts, meaning they're indexing the audio content and they're getting transcripts on the back end. And it means that now, instead of just listening, quote unquote, to an hour of podcast, Google now knows what you're talking about within these episodes. It's been an effort that's ongoing for them. However, as a podcaster, you're not getting that transcript, by the way. It's not something that you can download and access through Google's backend. It's just for them. In other words, the general discoverability for podcasting is still pretty poor, unfortunately. And what it means is, right now, for people to access your podcast, you've been told that you should write really good titles, which you should. You should understand SEO at a high level, the H1s, the H2s, and the use of keywords, more or less. But at the end of the day, what happens is people land on your podcast page, or they download your podcast episode, and they may disappear after 30 seconds or less. If they feel like your episode isn't going to suit them or isn't going to be a good use of their time, right? Think about it. People are stuck in traffic. That's when they listen to the podcast, but it's not necessarily your podcast. Everybody's top 10 podcasts may be in the category of a lot of the known sort of household names, such as the Joe Rogans, the Fresh Airs, the NPRs, the On Beings, and How Stuff Works. It's one of those. And they're saving their time to listen to those podcasts. And just because they're friends and family of yours, they may or may not listen to your show. Now, what I'm making an argument for is that as podcasters and content creators, we ought to curate our content. We are obligated to surface content and curate them and organize them in such a convenient way for our listeners. Yes, you gotta pamper them, you gotta serve them, you gotta babysit them. What it means is, let me take an example. One of the podcasters I know, named Tammy Guler-Loeb, she has a show called Work from the Inside Out. Interviews a bunch of really interesting guests. And there was one time in her interview, she interviewed this woman who used to work as a lawyer. for many years, was very successful. But very quickly, I guess towards some point of her career, she realized she didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And for her to switch that career into something completely different was very challenging. In fact, most lawyers are struggling with that, to think about the degrees that they've got, the time they spend on their law degree. How do they manage what Seth Godin called as sunk cost? How do they do that? Well, this woman explains how she did it successfully. Now, that's a hidden gem. However, in an episode, you might not get to that point until 30 minutes in. Doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be 30 minutes in. It could be 5 minutes in. At that point, you've lost your audience. What we have done as podcasters are creating show notes. Those are challenging, difficult, and takes a lot of money and time to create. What it means with show notes is approximate timestamps that you say minute 5, 7:50, 12:50. We're talking about these things and answering these questions. However, think about it. Unless you're Tim Ferriss, unless you're Joe Rogan, people are not going to listen to your episode trying to find the show notes, right, on your website and then scroll to that point just to listen. A few people may do that. For the most part, they're not going to do that. So there are a couple of ways to get around it. You can produce what we call sound bites using Headliner, which I include in the description below. Things like that can help you produce highlights, sound bites from an interview. So that's good for a lot of reasons, because people haven't heard this person's voice, don't know how that person shares or kind of articulate her ideas. Well, a sound bite, 30 seconds to a minute, is very helpful in that way and kind of tease out the best content within the episode. However, at the end of the day, it's still important for you to curate the content and organize them outside of the traditional episode. Consider as an exercise, perhaps out of 10 or 100 episodes you have produced, what are some of the similar topics, questions you tend to ask? And you ask those questions because of what? Because you try to answer certain questions so that you can help certain groups of people. So my partner, Adam, and I just had this conversation. I want to use this as an example because both of us are super into circus, performing arts. We've interviewed over a dozen circus artists from Cirque du Soleil, Seven Fingers Machine, the Cirque. We've interviewed people on and off Broadway. And it's really important to say, what are we doing? Why are we organizing the information? If your point is that these are good-looking people with six packs and you can put them on a landing page, well, guess what? People can also go to Instagram for that. What is really important is that you're serving a different cohort of people so that they can do something they weren't able to do before. For example, after listening to these episodes, a lot of people will come to me and say, I would love to have a career in Cirque du Soleil or circus in general. How do I do that? Well, we learned that you don't have to have a six-pack necessarily to be in Cirque du Soleil. There's so many areas of expertise that they desire, including pretty much all the departments that you see in the traditional firms, such as finance. And for them, there's cuisine or chef or cook that they travel with these artists on the road. They have people who work in marketing, PR, and they have people working in wardrobe, makeup artists. They need a lot of these resources. On top of that, let's say you can do a full split, you're not afraid of heights, and you like to fly 100 feet above the air. Well, you can do that too. And these circus artists will show you and tell you their origin stories, how they were able to compete with other gymnasts and people with similar skills from around the world for the jobs at Cirque du Soleil. So that's something you can expose and organize. So the more value that you can create for a certain cohort of people and then have them come visit will be hugely helpful. Now, you can do that through a landing page on your website, aggregating certain podcast episodes, but then surfacing what I just described in terms of a single blog post, in terms of sound bites, in terms of really short videos, very pointed videos answering specific questions will be very helpful. If you feel certainly ambitious somewhat, you can create your own course. For example, how to grow on YouTube, how to get your first job at the circus world, things along that line. So I wanted to riff about this. You know, it's hard to be a podcaster out there. And if you're starting out as a podcaster, I would certainly ask you to experiment. But it's a great idea to put yourself on YouTube as well. And I think I want to record a separate video for that. That's a huge miss on my end, because if I were to do it all over again when I started the show back in 2014, I would have absolutely started a YouTube channel. It's never too late. I started in October 2019 producing. at this channel publishing on a regular basis. And what I've learned is I have to think in terms of what other people are thinking, how they're asking questions in plain English. You have to really reconsider how you're exposing your work, how you're even writing. I am a big fan of Seth Godin, and I love the way he writes. And during our interview in my documentary, he said that he writes the same way he talks. Then he needs to learn how to talk better so he can write better. So that's something I want you to think about as well. Engage in tools used to understand data behind what people are searching for, what's engaging them, what they need help with. So there are a lot of tools and websites around that. So if you're a podcaster, I want you to think along the same line as that. When you run a podcast, record an interview, it's part of your research because you don't know as a host where these conversations are going, what exactly is going to surface from this particular person, because I know firsthand that a lot of people we interview, we're talking to them for the first time. We may have, read their books, but at the end of the day, that may be first human interaction with that person over Zoom, right? It's not even in person. So you don't know where that's gonna go. So you need to do a better job at summarizing the content, and then make great use of that. That's how you monetize your expertise. That's how you monetize your content. There's more work to be done beyond podcasting and the interviews. So I hope you find this helpful. Please share your stories with me. If you haven't subscribed, please do. And good luck. I know it's a hard journey, but it's worthwhile. I'll see you in the next video.